Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we'll be looking at Mistweavers in raiding environment. This guide is going to cover things like talent choices, best azerite traits, stat priority and gameplay that's associated with Mistweavers in raiding environment, and specifically in Uldir. I have made a Mythic Plus guide as well for Mistweavers, and it's going to be linked in the description below if you want to check that out as well. But first of all, let's look at the talent choices for Mistweavers. Now, this to some extent can be regarded as a default choice. I highly recommend for people to swap out or change some of these talents depending on which boss you're doing, because Mistweavers have quite a few different healing playstyles. Mistweaver can focus on tank sitting or tank healing build as well when there's a lot of single target healing needed. So it's all going to depend on a fight, and there are specific fights in Uldir which call for more single target healing, while other ones call for a bit more spot healing or AoE healing and things like that. So let's look at tier 15. It's mainly between two talents here. So Chi Burst is a relatively easy talent to use. You shoot out like a bolt that's going to deal damage and going to heal people along the way. People pick this when they can't utilize Miswraps. Miswraps increases enveloping mist duration. Miswraps, I'll talk about this later on, but it's mainly for the tank sitting build. So Chi Burst, Miswraps, depending on what you want to achieve. Tier 30 is your mobility. I think most people go with Chi Torpedo, depending on which fight you do. Things like Zekvos, if you get stuck, it can provide you with a lot of speed. It'll cover a big distance, it'll give you a speed boost and things like that. You can go with Tiger Slust, especially if there's a slowdown mobility as well. But I think Chi Burst is probably the most popular one here, and I think it's being used by Mistweavers for Cahoon and things like that. At tier 45 is your mana regen talent build, like how you want to save your mana. And mana is a big deal with Mistweavers. A lot of the questions that I get towards Mistweavers in raiding and 5-man scenarios is, I'm running out of mana, how do we deal with this? What's the best mana talent? And to be completely honest, you can utilize all of these talents on the right circumstances. The most popular one is Mana Tea, but it doesn't mean that it's the best for every situation. Mana Tea is great because it reduces the mana cost of your spells by 50%. It's not 100%, it's 50%. It's not like Innervate for Resto Druids where you get total 100% free casts. But Mana Tea is very popular, and it can be used for a lot of the fights, especially for the fights where you know there's going to be burst healing needed, and you can use Mana Tea and you can like really go ham with your Vivifies, because you most likely will be spamming Vivifies when you use Mana Tea. But you also can get away with Spirit the Crane, which I'll talk about a build later on, and you can get away with Life Cycles as well, especially for that tank sitting build where you'll be casting a lot of like Soothing Mists, Enveloping Mists onto a tank followed by like Vivifies, and during the tank sitting build you most likely will be going something like Life Cycles and Miswraps. So keep that in mind, especially for fights like Fetid. When I talk about tank sitting build, Fetid Devourer is probably the prime example where tank sitting build can work really well for a Mistweaver, and most of the Mistweavers will be going with things like Miswraps and Life Cycles for Fetid Devourer, but for a lot of the other fights they'll go with a default build or somewhere along the lines of this. But in tier 45 you can utilize a lot of these spells depending on how you use it, but Mana Tea is the most popular one right now, but it doesn't mean it's always the best. Tier 60 most likely will be Ring of Peace, very versatile, can be used on some of the Mythic Raid Uldir fights. It can be very useful. Somewhat situational though. Tier 75, most of the Mistweavers will go with Diffuse Magic, reduces the magic damage you take by 60%. It's on 1.5 minute cooldown. Most of the raid damage that's going to happen in Uldir is going to be magic. At least that's going to happen to the, melee or the casters and things like that. So you can't go wrong with Diffuse Magic in Uldir for the time being. At tier 90, again, there's been a lot of debate on which one's the best and things like that. Again, it's based on a situation. Probably the most common one to be used is the Jade Serpent statue, because it provides constant single target healing, especially if your raid group is lacking single target healing. Jade statue can provide like constant healing. Refreshing Jade Wind is another talent that's used by a lot of Mistweavers depending on a fight, like fights like, say for example, Vectis Zekvos, where there's constant AoE healing happening. At the very start, a lot of Mistweavers were going with Refreshing Jade Wind in order to provide more AoE healing. Now that's changed, and a lot of Mistweavers have opted in to use the Jade Serpent statue, but it is viable to use Refreshing Jade Wind on certain fights. And then you have the Red Crane, which again, depending on which boss you do, can be usable. But it all depends on what kind of healing you need. Do you need that burst healing every 3 minutes? Is there a fight, or is there a section of the fight where you feel your raid really needs that AoE healing? Or do you feel that constant single target throughput from Jade Serpent statue is going to be more useful. So that's something to consider. In tier 100, it's all about upwelling, and majority of Mistweavers will never swap out of upwelling. It's far too strong right now. It's really, really good. If we look at the tank sitting build, the build would be something like Mistwrap's Life Cycles, and everything else would probably be something similar. Especially if you're doing tank sitting build, Jade Serpent statue is very good to provide that single target healing. And this build is probably the most popular on fights, like I mentioned, Fetid, where you will be casting or will be using Soothing Mist on your tank majority of the time. You'll most likely will be putting some Enveloping Mists into Vivifies, which again works really, really well with Life Cycles and gives you or reduces the mana cost. So don't get thrown by, oh, I don't see the mana gain from using Life Cycles. If you use tools like WoW Analyzer, they can tell you how much mana you end up saving, and Life Cycles can be very decent in those situations. So this is some of the tank sitting build. Let's look at the gameplay that's associated with Mistweavers in a raiding situation, and specifically with this type of build. With this type of build, you most likely, first of all, you have an arsenal of healing abilities that you can use. You have Renewing Mist, you have 2 charges of Renewing Mist. It's not uncommon for people to just use that on cooldown. Make sure that you try not to cast it on the same person who already has Renewing Mist. They have kind of improved the overwriting capabilities that used to happen with Renewing Mist, but overall you try to avoid casting Renewing Mist on the same person. You want to most likely cast it on cooldown. You can pair it up with things like Thunder Focus Tea. Now probably the most used Thunder Focus Tea in Uldir is between using it on Renewing Mist or using it on Vivify. If you use Thunder Focus Tea, you can cast Renewing Mist, and Renewing Mist is its duration is going to be increased. So it's going to bounce from person to person when they reach full HP. Or you can try to use Thunder Focus Tea into free Vivify, and Vivify is not going to cost any mana if you use Thunder Focus Tea into Vivify. And a lot of people do tend to use that because specifically on a really long fights where they feel mana might be a bit of an issue. I've seen a lot of vlogs and I've seen a lot of Mistweavers kind of going with this build, but it's not uncommon to try and do a bit of Renewing Mist, a bit of Vivifies and things like that. That's probably the most common usage of Thunder Focus Tea. If we look at the double mastery proc, so I mentioned this in the 5-man guide before. If you cast Essence Font is going to leave a hot on you. That hot, if you use your Renewing Mist, Vivify, Enveloping Mist, or to some extent Soothing Mist has a chance to proc your mastery, it will proc the mastery twice instead of once. So if you actually end up using, if you don't have this hot, if you end up using Renewing Mist, if you end up using Vivify, besides the heal that they provide originally, they're also going to proc your mastery, and that mastery heal, it's basically another heal. It's another heal on top of the heal that they provide, and that heal is going to be based on how much mastery you have. So the funny part is that with Essence Font is gonna put a hot on the person, and that hot is going to proc that heal twice if you use it on them. So the default scenario in ways to optimize your HPS is that if you're using Essence Font, you want to use your Vivifies or Renewing Mists on people who already have your Essence Font hot on them. That means you're gonna get more healing from the double mastery proc. It doesn't always work out like that, because if someone's about to die but they don't have the Essence Font hot on them, you're going to heal them anyways. You don't care about, you know, looking better on logs. You want to make sure they're going to survive. But if you want to output, or if you want to provide the most HPS, you should be trying to use your healing abilities on people who have this hot. And it's very, very important because it's free healing basically. Another thing that you have to keep in mind, if you're using Vivifies, try and make sure that your Renewing Mist or your Renewing Mist is on cooldown. Basically, you don't have any Renewing Mists that you can put out, because if you're about to use Vivify, the target that you're going to cast Vivify on is gonna heal the target, but it's also going to heal the people that have Renewing Mist on them. So Renewing Mist kinda act like mini beacons to some extent. So every time you use Vivify, you want to make sure that your Renewing Mists are flowing everywhere. So every time you're going to Vivify, the maximum number of people are going to get healed by your Renewing Mist through your Vivify. So it's another thing that you can improve as well with the use of Vivify. If we want to look at the mana usage and the best ways to use your mana, tea and things like that, you have to keep in mind, a lot of people tell me that they run out of mana as Mistweavers. one of the biggest issues, you're overcasting. You're casting too much Vivifies. Vivifies can be quite an expensive spell, so you have to keep in mind that spamming this spell can lead to mana inefficiencies. You can use Mana Tea, I mentioned this before. A lot of these tier 45 traits or talents are very, very viable. With Mana Tea, this is something that I've been trying out. I'm not sure if this is the most optimal way to do it, but let's say there's a lot. First of all, if you're speccing into Mana Tea, you want to make sure that you want to use Mana Tea as much as possible, but you also want to use it when there is healing to be done. Because if you end up pressing Mana Tea when there's no healing needed, you can't do really anything. It's not like a Resto Druid with Innervate, where you can press Innervate and put out rejuvenations and they're going to last for like 15 seconds. With Mistweaver, you need to make sure that there is enough healing to be done for the next 12 seconds, because that's how long your Mana Tea lasts. I've been trying out with this kind of priority with Mana Tea. I try to cast my Essence Font first, before, let's say there's AoE damage happening, continuous AoE damage. I cast my Essence Font, I cast my Mana Tea, I spam my Vivifies on the people that have the Essence Font hot. So I'm proccing Mastery twice on this person and the next person. And then when Mana Tea is about to expire, I cast Essence Font again. So I get quite a few Vivifies off, and I also, the last second, get a free Essence Font. So I've been experimenting with this kind of spell priority when I use Mana Tea. If you have better ones, please leave comments below and things like that. You can try it out as well. Another very common question that I get asked is, do I delay my Essence Font cast? Because with Upwelling, every 6 seconds that your Essence Font spends off cooldown, your Essence Font may be channeled for 1 additional second. So basically what it means, the longer you don't cast your Essence Font, the stronger it kind of becomes. So a lot of people have come under suspicions that, okay, there's quite a lot of AoE damage happening now, but what if I hold it off a couple of seconds? It's going to be more powerful, it's going to be better, it's worth it. It's not really, because Essence Font it's not an over exaggeration to say this. Essence Font is your #1 heal as a Mistweaver monk. It is going to be the top heal for nearly every single boss fight, depending. It's going to be a top heal by quite a large margin. And using it as many times as possible, or using it when it's needed, it's always going to be better than delaying your best heal to some extent. So if there is a lot of healing needed to be done, you should be using Essence Font. You should not be delaying it. You should use it when the healing is needed. It is your best healing ability. If we look at some of the alternative builds, so at the very start when Uldir came out, there's quite a few different mana regen builds that came out. One of them was probably Spirit of the Crane and Refreshing Jadewind. So Refreshing Jadewind is an AoE ability, summons a whirling tornado around you, causing a specific amount of healing over 8 seconds up to 6 allies within 10 yards. It's quite a short area of effect heal ability. You kind of use it and it's going to heal the people around you. Now this was quite popular for fights like Zekvos and Vectus and things like that, and especially with the Spirit of the Crane, where teaching the Monastery causes each additional blackout kick to restore a certain amount of mana. So what most Mistweavers used to do is that they would go to the boss, or they try and stack up their 3 teachings of the Monastery by casting or using 3 Tiger Palms and then using blackout kick. And this is going to restore mana for you. And besides that, while they're doing that, Mistweavers would use Refreshing Jadewind. They'll make sure that the Renewing Mists are always used, most likely under Thunder Focus Tea, and they'll be casting their Essence Font. So majority of the time they will be using something like this, and when they have downtime, they'll go and punch the boss and try and get the mana back. This is another viable build. This is another viable build that Mistweavers use at an expense of Soothing Mist. You won't be casting any Soothing Mist with this build, or a lot of the downtime that you will have will be spent DPSing and getting your mana back. Over the time, Mistweavers have kind of opted in to use Mana Tea instead of the Spirit of the Crane, especially when they feel that they won't have any mana issues. They'll have external innovates, they'll have Blessing of Wisdoms, so they won't have to go to the boss and DPS the boss. Instead, they will still pick Refreshing Jadewind because it will give them additional healing, especially if they stay in stacked up groups with the melee or range or things like that. They'll get additional healing from it. They'll be able to cast Soothing Mist. They'll be able to heal the tank. They'll be able to heal the raid. They'll be able to cast Vivifies. And they won't have to, spend all of their free time trying to get mana back. So this is what happened over time when people got more comfortable with how mana was used. If you're not really comfortable with mana usage, a lot of people did go with Spirit of the Crane for the progression kills for Zekros Vectis and a couple of other fights as well. So you have to keep that in mind as well. If we look at one of the top Azerite gear pieces, or the Azerite traits that are really popular, Font of Life in raiding scenarios, anything that increases your Essence Font is pretty strong, because Essence Font for majority of the fights in Uldir is going to be your top heal. Archive the Titans is mandatory to some extent, at least one Archive the Titans or even Laser Matrix in order to proc your Reorigination Array. For the people who don't know what Reorigination Array is, in Uldir you have to kill, I think it's actually 3 bosses per week. And this stacks up. So you kill 3 bosses per week, you're going to get a specific bonus to your secondary stat, the highest secondary stat. You're going to get additional of that. So let's say my crit was the highest. Every week I'm killing 3 bosses, my array is stacking up. So at some point it's giving me like, I think right now it's giving me like 500 extra crit. So by just having a single piece with Archive of the Titans, I can get this huge secondary bonus. Archive of the Titans is the more popular option, or is the better trait to use over Laser Matrix. But if you don't have Archive of the Titans, Laser Matrix is still going to be very strong, because it gives you this Reorigination Array. So keep that in mind. To some extent you also can look at some of the Azerite traits that give you, like, you know, Critical Strike. You can also look at Uplifted Spirits, which increases your Vivify healing. It is relatively strong, especially in the fights where you end up using a lot of Vivifies, where you end up using your Vivify as the main filler spell. If the tank needs a lot of healing, you end up going like, you know, Soothing Mist, Enveloping Mist, Vivify, or whatever kind of combo. It can be a very decent trait as well, so it really depends. And this kind of leads on to the stat priority. And stat priority is very interesting for raiding Mistweaver. First of all, I'm going to say crit and versatility are probably the go-to stats for a generic Mistweaver build. And why do I say this? Because you can't really go wrong with those stats. Then you probably have Mastery, and Mastery is very dependent on the type of fight that you do. If you end up casting a lot of Vivifies, if you end up maybe doing a lot of, for example, for most of the Fetid Devour kills, I've checked a lot of logs and things like that, most of the Mistweavers are casting a lot of Enveloping Mist, they're casting Soothing Mist, they're casting Vivifies, and their stat priority is leaning towards Mastery. Mastery becomes a very nice stat to have. And on other fights where they don't cast that many Vivifies, they don't really focus on proccing their Mastery as much, all of a sudden crit and versatility become a little bit stronger. So overall, that's why I mentioned, you can't go wrong with crit and versatility. And after that, you have to see what kind of fight you're doing. Are you casting a lot of Vivifies? There is a chance that Mastery might be a very decent stat for you. And to determine your haste, I highly advise people to use things like healer stat weights, to use like WoW analyzers, to use things like Peak of Serenity spreadsheet, where you can input data from your fights and you can see how much your haste is valued. Now this is a big disclaimer right now. I'm going to be talking about my stat priority. So this is going to be for a single person. My stat priority as a Mistweaver in Uldir. This does not mean it's going to be the same for you. So before you're going to be telling that this is the best, keep this in mind. For me personally, crit and versatility are very strong. Mastery is a very decent stat on some fights like Fetid Devour, on fights where I'm used for tank healing mainly. I do see Mastery sometimes even becoming one of my best stats, or very close to crit and versatility. And overall, from all the logs, from all the spreadsheets, add-ons that I've been using, haste has been valued very low, or as the least valuable stat for me for most of Uldir. So this has led me into, you know, getting as little haste as possible for my Mistweaver, depending on the item level of gear and things like that. So I'm right now getting as much crit, getting as much as versatility as possible, and I also have gear that gives me Mastery, things like rings that give me Mastery when I want to swap over, when I'm doing Fetid Devour, and Mastery is going to be very good for me. I swap over my rings that give me Mastery. So I advise people to use, you know, the spreadsheets, to use WoW Analyzer, healer stat weights to see what stat priority is really good for you, and have backup gear. So this has been a relatively default or relatively general overview of Mistweaver raid healing, raid Azerite gear, stat priority, and things like that. I would really like to hear your opinions about the guide, but it helped you. Maybe you have some improvements. You can leave them in comments below. I'll try and read them and answer them and things like that. Thank you for watching this guide. I'll see you in my next video.